Hello and welcome to the Eleiko webinar. We're going to be talking about getting started with a strength program and what a strength program is all about. Also, how we can develop our own strength training programs. We'll give it a couple more minutes here while our attendees file in. Hope you are all doing great today, and thank you for joining us. I say us because we have Rodney in the background who's going to be fielding questions. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end to address some of those questions. Give it a couple more minutes and then I'll say one more minute before we get started here. As we wait for our attendees to file in, just a few housekeeping bullet points here. You are all on mute, so don't worry about interrupting the presentation. And there will be a recording of this presentation once we complete it, and it'll be put on the eleiko.com website probably in the next couple of days or so. Throughout the presentation here, we'll be asking some questions, so we appreciate your contribution to that. It gives us an idea of who you are and what you're looking for future education, along with resources. All right, looks like we've slowed down here with our attendees joining us. So before we get started, I do want to ask you guys one question. Which of the following best represents you? And if we launch the poll here, please just take a second and let us know who you are. What kind of background are you coming from? Whether you're a coach, trainer, athlete, you're just a fitness enthusiast looking to learn a little bit more, owner, operator, or other. And I'd be interested to know what other you are. So you can add that to the questions tab that you're able to communicate with us. Again, Rodney's in the background fielding some questions immediately and also bringing that to my attention, throughout the presentation. So feel free to drop in comments in the question tab. Right. Let's close the poll here and share results. So it looks like we have about 39% strength condition coaches, personal trainers, 13% athlete, 35% fitness enthusiast, and about 6% other. So thank you all for joining. Deeply appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know you're busy to learn with us. So my name is Patrick Wormel. I am the Tactical Education Manager here at Eleiko. I work with Rodney Korn, who's the Director of Education. Again, he's on the background here for today, fielding some questions. So getting started with a strength program. Just to give you the bottom line up front here, what we're going to be discussing, strength training has many physical and mental health benefits, and it can absolutely be done by everyone. And we're going to try to help you all navigate that journey. Effective strength training programs target specific goals and are ability-based, and a progressive and systematic application of those exercise variables provide the stimulus and the needed recovery to produce optimal results. So with that being said, we're going to break this down into further detail throughout the presentation, but those are going to be the major talking points for this presentation. We always like to define what we're talking about so everyone is on the same page here. I know many of you know this already, but what is strength training? Strength training is a form of physical activity that uses external resistance. Now, there's many methods of strength training, whether we are working to produce just lean muscle mass or hypertrophy through bodybuilding. We have our Olympic style weightlifting. We're developing a lot of strength power work. If we're functional training, that's a method of training, working on just general strength gains, relative strength that help us with everyday life. We have some metabolic conditioning or high intensity interval training, great for fat loss and muscular endurance. And we have, our powerlifting types where our traditional resistance training, where we're trying to lift the most weight possible and gaining maximal strength. So we do have those different types of strength qualities that we're looking for. And how we do that is through our strength program. Now, our strength program is a form of periodization. It's another term for periodization. For this presentation, we're not going to go into the different types of periodization. We're just going to use the loose term of, periodization or strength program is a long-term plan that creates intentional adaptation. Now, intentional adaptation is the key word there, right? We need to know exactly what we're chasing in order to plan for that, whether it's physical, mental well-being, functional performance, and then what type of those mini methods that we discussed are we going to use to get the adaptation that we're searching for. So periodization or strength program, very well understood concept and can be applied differently depending upon the training goals. Now, if we do this, even for a short term, whether it's 4 to 8 weeks of consistent training, we can start to see many health benefits. There's a reason why that strength training is used as a medicine, right? Backed by extensive research, widely recognized that strength training is fundamental to overall health, well-being, and even longevity. So the desire to build muscles for aesthetics is a secondary effect. But if we look at more of our physical benefits, right, reduces all-cause mortality. I can pretty much stop there with the benefits. That's the most important one, right? And these can help prevent the most harmful diseases to our time, or mitigate their consequences if it does happen. Can decrease hypertension, heart disease, strokes, type 2 diabetes, and then lower the risk lower risk of death caused by cancer as well. So the immune system has quite the effect and benefit when exercise programs are done appropriately. Also, mental benefits, right, can help with sleep, improves mood, energy, motivation, and enhances our self-esteem. So if we look at the strength types, one major principle you may or may not be familiar with is Wolff and Davis law, right? And this is that tissues adapt to the specific demand imposed upon them, the SAID principle. And really that's the underlying principle that the type of demand on the body dictates the adaptation that will occur. In other words, your body is going to adapt how you train it. And it's important to know your goals when it comes to resistance training, and also, you know, the type of a program that you're going to be using. What goes into the periodized approach for the sets, the reps, the load being used, the recovery times within those, along with, you know, what kind of exercise selection are you going to be using? Is it more multi-joint movements under load, or are we isolating muscle types? And that's going to, again, give us our adaptations for either, you know, muscular endurance, repetitive effort, muscular strength, the amount of strength relative to body size, so that's muscular relative strength, as well as our muscular power, the ability to exert maximal force. So what am I saying? Force and velocity, they have, you know, an inverse relationship. If I'm looking at higher force movement selection and strength programs, then that's going to be targeting more your maximal strength or your strength speed. Like heavy implement power, we call HIP, which is more slower power work, where we're moving heavier weights with maximal intention, but the weight's moving a little bit slower than our speed strength, which is our light implement power, where these are lighter loads, lighter force, but moved with a higher velocity. Now, if we're kind of surfing this curve, the intention is to raise that curve slightly higher, right? So now we have an increased ability for our maximal strength, our power, our speed. And this is kind of the idea of surfing that line, where we're working on not just one strength quality at a time, but we can work throughout this continuum of the force velocity curve. So some key programming principles on how we can do that. This is kind of, you know, like lessons learned or my perception on some key principles to focus in on. Number one is it has to be ability based. And we'll go into more depth on each one of these as we go through the presentation, more of the 30,000 foot view here. But there's no need to force feed lifts in a program. There will be times we want to challenge the ability level, but we should be sitting for the most of the time inside someone's ability level, and there'll be plenty of time again to progress through long-term development. So it's not necessarily about you know, looking for the most trendiest exercise out there. It's more about, you know, does it match the ability with the goals? Are you able to teach it if you are a coach and trainer? A lot of you are. Can the client or athlete execute it? Does it fit your logistics? You know, the environment that you're in. Is it safe? And I want to kind of be careful with the safe, because sometimes safe strength training is not effective either, right? If it's not within somebody's ability. But instead of safe, I want to kind of think simple. Is it simple? Going back to it, can you teach it? Can they execute it? Does it fit into your logistics? And then asking yourself, are there better alternatives for the purpose? Progressive overload. We can't be doing the same things over and over and over again. There could be simple modifications to the program that strive for continuous improvement. So we have to know the limit of someone's current ability, know where to start them, and then slowly progress over a period of time. And that can be with exercise selection, that can be with our exercise variables like our reps, sets, our intensity, our rest between sets, and so forth. Again, we'll get into more of that. Number 3, understand the intention. I'll probably sound like a broken record with this throughout the presentation here, but I feel like this is so important for how it's actually being executed, whether it's the training session or if it's the specific training exercise. You've got to understand what the intention is and have a why for putting it into your programs. Again, going back, are there better alternatives for your choice? 4, using more of a movement-based approach here rather than just a muscle-based approach. Now that can be very helpful for hypertrophy training. If we're talking more general strength training, which I'm going to be referring to for the purpose of this presentation, using a movement-based training makes your training programs efficient and effective throughout the long term. Understanding the volume intensity relationship. So if it's going to be a high volume phase or program, understand that the intensity is going to be a lot less, right? It's almost like an X here. When volume is really high, your intensity is very low. And those can crisscross as time goes on, going back to number 2 with progressive overload. Number 6 is keeping the same exercises for roughly 4 weeks. Now, if we're doing this, depending upon your situation, this is great for the coaches and trainers. You don't have to, actually introduce new exercises every single week. Week 1, they get accumulated to it. They understand kind of what to do. Week 2, they have a lot better understanding of the same movement, what to expect, and little coaching cues that you're using there. So I personally like to keep the same exercises for roughly 4 weeks and manipulate other variables to get that progressive overload to occur. So typically that would be adding or removing volume, weight, progressing to the next variation of a movement through the next phase of training, and then switching to a new variation maybe of the same movement. So if on phase 1 I'm doing a goblet squat, phase 2 might be a double rack kettlebell squat, phase 3 might be a barbell front squat. So just using different equipment to switch the variation of movement. Monitoring training load. Now, I think readiness is the key to all of this. So understanding where people are coming in from on the day, but also understanding where the program's going through the long term. So monitoring your training load, asking the client athlete, how intense the training session was for that day, can also help the intention for the program. If you had say a lower intensity training session planned out, but your athletes or clients are telling you, whoa, that was a lot harder workout, that gives you the details of, okay, I need to modify this phase or training session to match the intention or the emphasis of the training session. And number 8, training residuals. I'm not going to go too much into this, but know that the studied effects are kind of built around high-level athletes on training residuals with years of training age. So some of the charts out there might not be accurate for clients with less than 1 to 2 years of training. Novice athletes, clients can lose gains in strength within as little as 7-10 days. And this is kind of makes a cause for a type of periodization called vertical integration. And vertical integration is simply combining all of your training components, like our speed strength, our conditioning, into one template or one program, but focusing in on one specific area at a time. So we're always getting a adaptation or a challenge to working with lighter loads at a faster velocity. We're getting a response to moving moderate to heavy loads, and we're also getting a response to repeated efforts. So this is what I kind of see for at least in my context, and to give you some context, who I work with: adult general population, tactical professionals, youth athletes. I'm going to be using the same recipe for, I would say, 98% of the time. And the recipe, there are specific ingredients and specific amounts, and even specific timing used, like I was talking about with the vertical integration. And you can't necessarily alter the recipe in huge drastic ways by removing some of these components and expecting the same outcome or the same desired taste. You start to kind of ruin the food. And what you can do is make some subtle changes to the program to get the desired taste. So that's the variables there. That's changing the exercise complexity to fit the ability level for the client athlete or the group of athletes. And that may play a role for the training experience as a whole, making it, unique to the individual's preference, to their goals. And that's where, understanding the purpose of the training is so crucial. So just to give you, again, a little bit more context, what I'm referring to here, movement preparation is more our broader term used to describe the various methods to use some mobility, activation, and synergy of movement. So the integration of movement, how we can move in space and three-dimensionally unloaded, that can set us up for being prepared for the major portion of the training session, like our speed, strength, power work. This would be more for our light implement power, which is, again, moving lighter loads at a very fast velocity. So this could be exercise like our jumping, our throwing movements, our sprinting movements. And that's before we head into our strength block. And that can actually, doing our speed strength can actually help us better prepare for our strength block. We're ready to move at this point where we don't have to do a ton of warm-up sets for our strength training. Our strength training is going to be focused on, again, a movement-based approach where we're doing pushing, pulling, squatting, lunging, hinging work. And that can be broken up to our primary lifts, our secondary lifts, and more of our auxiliary lifts. And then our conditioning. So this is a more of a whole body approach here, a total body approach, where we're working, again, power work, our strength work, but we're also working our conditioning work. Whether you want to call it work capacity, conditioning, great to improve our body's aerobic and anaerobic power and capacity. And we always finish with a recovery. We try to down-regulate the body and the mind and help stimulate that recovery process, come back down to baseline per se, for lack of a better term. So all that being said, now that the groundwork's covered, what determines the proper strength training program for you or for your client athlete? This is where it all begins. It's about the context here. So some things to take into consideration here. What's the training age and history? How do they prefer to train? Do they have training related injuries? And then knowing the current ability level. So this is kind of the situation, right? We have, what's their knowledge of training? What's their physical capacity, their strength, and then understanding their daily stressors. What are they coming into you as from a readiness standpoint? How do we target their weak links? For the environment, what do you have available to you? Whether you have a full sport performance facility, are you in a commercial gym, or are you have a huge group and you're outside and you have limited equipment that you can use for everybody? That's going to come into a big role for your programming design. And then time, how much time do you have for the training session, as well as frequency throughout the week? How many times are you seeing people? For my general population, very much different than the tactical population, where their schedules are very unpredictable. So having to be flexible with my programming approach for tactical population might be different than my general population that I'm seeing 3 times a week, in a very consistent manner throughout a period of time. Now, going back to the recipe, still using the same recipe, but how I apply that might be a little bit different there. And then ultimately, what's the goal and what's the purpose? What's the reason for training, and what are you trying to get out of the training? And that comes to our performance strategy here. Once I'm able to determine the ability, and everything starts with the ability, then I'm able to start to construct the complexity piece. So what they're actually being asked to do. And this can be from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint. Our complexity is pretty much, how much challenge can be placed on a person at that time. And if you look at ability, we have our overall ability, which is something that we typically take into place. But I think more and more now, it's getting obvious that we need to consider the daily ability. And our daily ability, which we'll get into here in a little bit with our raw scoring system, just how much stress are they coming into you as, and how we can manipulate our training session based upon how they're feeling that day. And that helps with really empowering somebody to continue their strength training journey. That increases their perception about themselves and the perception about the training program as a whole. I know personally, you can write the best training program in the world. You can know that it gets you repeated results, but if someone just doesn't like doing what you're doing, then they're not going to do it for a period of time. So perceptions are either positive or negative based upon how they make us feel, and that's what really helps people stick to long-term development. And if we're able to get them for long-term development, that's when really our adaptations can take place here. So when we're looking at this chart, right, that the light blue area is the optimal complexity for the ability level. The orange square is our suboptimal. So that's getting outside of people's ability level, or our physical and mental ability level, whether that's overall or on a daily basis. And if we're able to stick to that light blue, then most times than not, it's going to be a positive perception. They're leaving feeling better than what they came in as. If someone's coming in, fairly beat up, high stress, and we're just adding on to that, we're starting to overfill the bucket. Right? The water's starting to come out the sides, and if they're leaving more drained than they were coming in, it's going to lead to more of a negative perception. Or the vice versa, if they're ready to go and we're just telling them to do a very light training load and not challenging them enough, then they're going to, what's the point of training, right? So leaving a negative perception. So super important, sticking to that light blue square where we can over time increase our ability level. And if we're focused on long-term development, we have time to do that. There's no need to, again, force feed complexity. So daily ability, we use our raw score or our readiness and well-being scoring system. And this allows us to strategically just monitor and track daily readiness, stress levels using 4 distinct pillars, and that's sleep, physical, mood, and nutrition. And this is all validated, and what we can start to do is, we know that everyone's ability is going to fluctuate based from day to day. We're not all the same all the time, right? And that's always, it's caused by stress. And anything is a stressor. So it's worthwhile to be aware of daily readiness and using the 4 simple pillars: sleep, physical, mood, nutrition. You can get a quick score to help modify that training session. And that's just a form of auto-regulation. And auto-regulation is adjusting our exercise prescription based upon the daily readiness level. And it's an important factor for maximizing results. And it can start to become an adaptive management system that can almost regulate individual differences from day to day. Whether you're working with clients, athletes one-on-one, or a big group setting, especially for a big group setting, right? We need to make sure the training session fits everybody and that everyone's getting a similar response to that training, even though one person might be coming in with a very low raw score versus someone that is coming in ready to go. So that's going to help decrease risk of injury, illness, which is a setback throughout our training process, and also helps just with sustaining daily performance. So we're not just leaving the gym just, run down or completely exhausted, right? We have lives outside of the gym, and we need to make sure that we're not hurting that capacity for daily performance. So, looking at the water, the glass of water, this gives us kind of a reference point of how much training or external load we have left in the tank before we start to overfill, like I was speaking about before. If somebody has a very high raw score, they're coming into the session ready to go, then that glass is just barely full. We have more room to work with versus somebody that's coming in at a lower raw score, say like a 4 to a 6, they're coming in feeling pretty down, pretty beat up, then our training session needs to be modified for our training, our external load. And what that can also be monitored as, again, going to our total training load. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion. It's an individual's rate of the amount of stress that is being perceived during an exercise training session. The scale's out of 1 to 10 if you're not familiar with this. 1 is you're sitting on the couch watching Netflix, and 10 is you are working so hard, there's smoke coming out of your ears, you're red in the face, and you can't get out a word because you're breathing so heavily. what you can do to, again, give you as a coach or a trainer a good idea is to start tracking your training load over a period of time. And you should see some fluctuations from low, moderate, high training loads. And that can just be determined by the duration of the training session and then their perceived intensity. Now, this isn't a perfect way to track all your training, but it does give you an idea about what it looks like throughout a period of time. Some other ways that we can adjust our programs dependent upon their raw score. From a 30,000 foot view, we can manipulate the volume. So you can see we have two different columns here. This is either specific to an Eleiko program or just any program adjustment maybe that you have currently. So we can manipulate the volume. Typically for lower scores, we want to reduce the total volume quite a bit, 25 to 30%. And also that can go with a session length. So we can be removing exercises from the training program, which is going to reduce the session. We can also, we have a whole other webinar on how we can manipulate the training session just based upon our raw score. So I won't go too much into it. Hopefully I'm giving you enough examples as we go through here. Please comment if you want more though. For our intensity and our effort, we can decrease the RPE for our lower scores, as well as kind of match it with the training adaptations goal. Typically for me, I like to keep the intensity the same no matter what, but I will manipulate volume for most people. From my experience, I feel like volume is a big one that people will either get worn down by or it will help push the progress or the progressive overload principle. And keeping intensity relatively the same is going to typically still match what the goal and the purpose of the training is. So if I'm trying to get strength gains, I'm going to still have heavier loads, and heavier intensity, but I'm going to either take out exercises. I'm going to, if it was prescribed for 4 sets, I might be just doing 2 sets at that point, just keeping with the same intensity. And then manipulating our work to rest. So for our lower scores of 4 to 6, I'm going to increase the rest between the sets. Also, it brings some good talking points at this point for coaches and trainers to communicate with the athlete, the clients, the team as a whole on why is your score so low? Are we seeing trends for specific pillars where they're causing red flags? So if your sleep has been consistently a 1 or 2 for a period of time, now I can start to educate on proper sleep hygiene. And this is kind of including more rest time in a trickery way, if that's a word. It allows some education to be happening on trying to get the score to rise throughout a period of time. Some other complexity adjustments here. We have our exercise selection. Right, movements require combined interaction of equipment, position, and actions. So we have equipment, the tool being used, the equipment, or sorry, the position, which is the equipment relative to the body. And so this would be, where the equipment is being placed can help change the mechanics and the stress put on the body, whether it's symmetrical, holding two weights, or asymmetrical, held, above the head or at the chest or by the sides, all different ways to manipulate how the weight and the mechanics and stress put on the body. And we also have our action as the desired movement or lift. Now, we use our movement types for this. Our movement types are just our primary movement patterns. We have our squat, we have our lunge, we have our hinge, press, pull, and carry. And now if we're trying to ingrain some of these movement patterns for general strength, which can carry over to our everyday life and increase our performance, whether it's just daily activities or if it's for specific sports or hobbies that you may have. And the truth is, if you're doing a long-term commitment to strength training, it'll often mean doing the same exercises over and over again, or the same movement patterns over and over again. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be boring or repetitive. What we can do is provide some novelty with varying stimuluses, using different volumes, intensities, tempos, going back to positions, changing just simply the position that we're putting either the body in or the equipment in can create some novelty within our programs. So if we look at kind of this continuum of our complexity, right? We have our range of motion. So we can, definitely, if you're starting out with a strength training program, decreasing the range of motion and eventually moving to a little bit more range of motion, complete range of motion. From a speed standpoint, slowing the movement down and then moving to a faster rate of movement. And that goes the same with the force or the time under tension. Beginners, novelty, again, going with low force, so low amount of weight, and time under tension. And that can go down to the continuum or through the continuum to higher force, higher time under tension. And then using different contraction types, how we're actually completing the exercise, whether it's a isometric focus, in eccentric control focus, power speed focus. We're using almost a contrast focus where we're doing a heavy force or high force exercise followed by a very high velocity exercise. So all ways that we can manipulate our complexity to not only provide novelty for a long-term commitment to strength, but also to get the desired adaptation that we're seeking. We'll talk more about that here. So exercise selection. I know this is like, there's a ton on here, not looking for you to look through all of this, but this is one way that I like to kind of organize my exercise selection. Based upon the movement actions, we have our pushes and pulls that we can move horizontally. So if I'm doing a push, it's moving a weight horizontally away from my chest. If I'm doing a horizontal pull, that is bringing a weight to my chest. Vertical would be vice versa. I'm moving a weight away in a vertical direction or pulling the weight in a vertical direction. And our squat, lunge, and hinge. So these are kind of my main exercises that I will use for those different categories. And being able to manipulate that down the line. Again, working in a tactical population, you wouldn't believe the amount of variance it is in ability levels. So having something that I can quickly adjust my movement or my exercise selection based upon the ability is a great way to organize the training. If you see the link below, I believe Rodney will drop it in the comments section. We have all of these exercises, or 90% of them, on our exercise library in our resource page on Eleiko.inspire360. So you can take a look at those. They're broken down throughout the movement types or the movement actions. So you can take a peek at them. And the plan here is to have those linked into programs. So I'd like to ask you a couple questions here. If you are interested in programs and kind of what type of programs that you would like to see more of. So I'm going to launch this. This is the first one. Are you interested in training programs? Just a yes or no. Quick question here. And then thinking about what type of programs that you would like to receive or see more of. Awesome. We have 96% say yes, 4% say no. Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to just go right into the next one here. What type of training are you most interested in as this comes up? We got about 20% voted. Give it a few more seconds. So we got, are you interested in more Olympic style weightlifting, powerlifting, functional hybrid training, tactical training? You're just trying to improve your recovery. By the way, we have courses for each one of these where we go into a lot more detail on exercise technique. We go into detail on coaching and also programming for these in the specific courses. We live education as well as online education that could be found on Eleiko.inspire360. Perfect. So we got about 48% Olympic, 39 powerlifting, 60% functional, 16 tactical, 21 recovery. Nice. And the last thing I want to ask is, are you interested in learning how to design your own strength training programs? Very interested, somewhat, or not interested at all? Right, 84% very, 17, 18 somewhat, 1 not interested at all. I just want to be told what to do. Hey, I get it. I get it. All right. Since a lot of you are, I would like to get into, I know we're kind of running about, say, 10 minutes or so. This is what we really need to focus in on here, is what the emphasis and intention is on for certain goals. This is going to give us our exercise variables and know where to progress over time. So for muscle growth, we need to be going close to failure. This is where volume is super important. Intensity might vary, so it doesn't necessarily matter how much load we're going as long as we're working under tension for longer durations and close to failure. Over time, we can start to increase the volume, so the amount of sets that were being used during a training session. So you can use the same weight and try to get as much sets as possible with that same weight, trying to hit the rep range of, for an example, 8 to 10. As soon as you fall out of that rep range with that weight, then cut it off. That's good for that session. Try to get it in the next couple of weeks. Try to increase that through the next couple of weeks. Rest times, I found not super influential on muscle growth. But a good recommendation, general guideline, is to rest 1 to 3 minutes between your exercises. When we're training for relative strength or general strength, we're looking at starting off with more hypertrophy training, getting into some neural efficiency and technical efficiency. So not specific guidelines here, but where we want to begin, we can just get a broad base of strength, our general strength with non-specific variations of the desired lifts that we want to include. Then we can prioritize the primary bilateral exercises or desired lifts, and have a little less accessory lifts. Less fatiguing, we can prioritize the desired exercises. Obviously, super important for our powerlifting. If you're going to be doing any sort of competition, this is where this comes into play. And then we can also use unilateral movements, like say our lunges, our single leg deadlifts, single leg squats, single arm bench press, to lessen the external resistance needs. If I'm only on one leg, not everyone wants to have a 300-pound bar on them, so I can decrease the load but still get a very high training response to our strength with a unilateral movement and a lesser load. But in general, begin with higher rep ranges, anywhere from 6 to 10, and then move to a lower rep range where we know for that inverse relationship, it needs to have a higher load. So staying within 1 to 6 reps, increasing intensity as strength increases. And then for power development, we have different types of power. As I talked about, we have our strength speed, or our slow power, where we are prioritizing heavy implement exercises. This is like weightlifting, our kettlebell swings, our loaded jumps. With our speed strength, we're focused more on velocity, then we're using our light implement exercises such as our unloaded jumps, our bounds and hops. We can be using medicine ball throws, really lightweight, trying to break the ball essentially, and even including some sprint work in there. Sprint is great, total body, light implement power work. Rep ranges going to really depend on what type of power work you're doing here. The range can be from 30% 1 RM, 1 rep max, to all the way to 80% 1 RM to develop power development. So again, the range is very vast, and that's why we like to break up our power through slow power, fast power, and we can even include our reactive power, like true plyometrics, repeated jumps, repeated throws, and best trained with minimal fatigue, maximal intention. So if we're doing total body strength training, our movement ordering, and this is how we kind of set up your own training program here. Again, this is specific to total body strength training, but movement ordering does matter. We want to begin with the priority. Through my approach, use the neurological demanding movement. So this is where I'm going to be doing my power work, focusing in on kinetic linking, how the body works together. We're looking at most physical demanding. So this is our strength work, and then what can supplement that strength work with rotation or core work, mobility movements, anything that supports that primary emphasis or the member's needs, the client athlete's needs. Another way to organize your training is thinking about the emphasis or the intention of the movement. So what movements are, so if I'm looking at build, I'm trying to get my body in the most biomechanical efficient way. So using our, front squat, back squat, doing our traditional deadlifts, versus if I'm more in a hypertrophy, movement selection can be a little bit more, have more variance. So I can manipulate my position of the body or where the load is going to be, because I'm not so much focused on the load itself. And then with our peak or our power work, I'm trying to set the body up where I can move in a dynamic fashion. I can move in explosive ways. So just an example of how you can break down your exercise selection based upon the intent of the workout or the specific movement. So creating your own strength program, this is kind of the phasic approach here, right? We need to know the goals, the overall ability, and that's going to give us the training adaptation that we're looking for. Looking at the style of training, what's the preference? What's the preference for the individual, but what's your preference as the coach or the trainer? Training frequency, how often are you going to be doing this throughout the week? It gives us the exercise selection and then the variables. So training intention, we break this down into 4 basic goals here, whether it's to improve the amount of work that can be accomplished, which is more of our endurance or our muscle mass, our grow, trying to increase our relative strength, and our go, trying to increase the ability to produce force. And then we have our recovery as well. We're trying to stimulate the recovery process without just having a recovery day with foam rolling and mobility work, where we still can include some strength training in there. It's just done more in a strategic way. This would be a sample template for a daily template that could be used. You can see the exercise variables, different kind of changing whether you're using a gain, grow, go approach. But again, we're getting all the movement types in there. We're working on some power work, we're working on some strength work, and we're also working on some capacity work or repeated effort work. And our training frequency. So I truly think that frequency is a product of how much volume we're putting into our training sessions. So the lower number of sessions per week, the more volume per session, or the more exercises that I'm going to be doing that session. The higher frequency, the lower volume is needed, and we're able to go into the next training session with a minimal fatigue and try to push where we can with a higher frequency. So it's going to be determined by exposure, and different exercises are going to have different exposure frequencies. I tend to like to get roughly about 10 to 18 sets per movement group throughout the week, just to give you an idea there. But more volume does not necessarily mean it's better. So our theme splits here, this would be an upper-lower example. And then if you're looking for training frequency for multiple strength qualities, this is one way to set it up. I typically like to do this with a little bit more trained athletes where they have a good base strength, and then we're able to focus in on specific qualities or a strength theme at a time, whether that's more strength endurance, relative strength, or power work. Again, the constants are going to be how that template is set up. The variance is in the movement selection and the exercise variables. And then having a organized process to plan on how you're going to scale and adjust appropriately. Just like to have a standard and then a couple modifications, making them a little bit easier for the action or to progress if needed. Again, trying to match that ability with the complexity. And this is typically what I'll be kind of using for exercise variables or acute variables for the training session. And then again, we can't do this over and over again. We need progressive overload. So this will modify through phases. So one phase, again, we might be able to use, this is an example here, where we're using the same exercises for 4 weeks, but we're changing the reps, the sets, and the load being used for those. To go back, now we're using trisets and supersets, a super efficient way to get a lot of work done in a limited time. I think, you know, for the most cases, it's a great way to include a lot of volume or the necessary volume for the training session. Trisets is simply 3 exercises back to back to back. Superset is exercises back to back. So like to either have, you know, have a lower body exercise, an upper body exercise, and then like a core exercise or a task exercise, which can include like a carry of some sort, a farmer carry, suitcase carry. It can include some rotationary work where we're doing our chops and our lifts, and also just some groundwork, whether you just a plank or a pillar bridge that you can include there. Again, great way to get a lot of work done and pretty much cover 90% of the training that you actually need with 6 to 9 exercises. And again, this is just an example. If you want to take a snapshot out of it, please feel free. Again, there'll be a recording of this on the Eleiko website in a couple of days. But as we come to an end here, I'd like to just have some closing thoughts. If you're just starting out, start slow. You know, understand what really matters is knowing your current ability. If you're off of a hiatus, don't go back to just going right into what you were doing before. Have a couple of weeks to adapt and get adjusted to the training before we start to kind of push it a little bit further and further. So chasing volume, you know, if you're doing exactly what's on that program, that's kind of getting away from the readiness concept. So take your readiness score, adjust your programming based off of the readiness score, and that's what's going to get you efficient, meaningful results and allow you to have consistent training. And consistency compounds, right? You might not get the results in 1 to 2 weeks, but for long-term development and sustainability, it's crucial. And just using the 10% rule, increasing the intensity 10% every 2 weeks or so is a great way to do that. So again, start slow, keep it simple, and do the simple things really, really well, and you'll do great things here. Listen to your body, understand where you currently are, and your goals and purpose for training, and you can organize your training to meet those. So if you want to learn more about Eleiko, feel free to use the QR code. You know, from an education standpoint, we have years of coaching and practical application. We're trying to take some scientific evidence and research with our practical application and have that be usable for people like you, coaches, trainers, athletes, fitness enthusiasts. And you know, we have extended learning opportunities in both live and online formats. So take a look at those. Free training programs, there'll be more of those coming out with direct links to our exercise library. There's also webinars and articles that come out often. There'll be a webinar next month, February 22nd, on kettlebell training. If you're interested, a link will be coming out soon, so be on the outlook in your emails. Training tips and more, and then again, those online courses, live courses, opportunities. So that is it. I know we're kind of running out of time. I've gone over time. Ronnie, is there any questions that have come up, repeated questions?
Nope, all is well.
Okay, all right. Well, on that note, again, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a ton of information. I think we can have more webinars on specific aspects of programming and strength training in general. So please let us know what you would like to learn more about, and we'd be happy to put something together for you. Thank you for joining, and until next time.